The largest march ever in Chicago brought immigrant rights supporters into Grant Park May 1st in a show of strength unprecedented throughout labor, civil rights, or anti-war eras. The wave of marchers in cities across the country was designed to keep the pressure on elected officials in Washington. They continue to debate proposals and counterproposals on how to resolve the status of the estimated 12 million undocumented immigrants living in this country. In Chicago, the Human Rights Parade, as I like to call it, given the joyful spirit amongst the over 500,000 participants, we had the biggest turnout nationwide. But what were organizers trying to accomplish? With all the media coverage, what will advocates do with such people power? Well, tonight on Community Media and You, we have a discussion with two organizers of the march, actually participants in the march. They'll talk about who organized it. Belcore is the executive director of the Korean American Resource and Cultural Center, and Julissa Ruiz from Latinos United. Thank you both for joining us tonight. This was quite a parade, as I like to call it, because in fact it was a pretty joyful march for a variety of things. How was your organization, Becky, involved with the Immigrant March on May Day? How did you get plugged in?
Well, after we sent a small delegation to participate in the first march on March 10th, we were invited to meet with the Latino organizations who had organized the first march, and it was a very inclusive effort. They made a lot of outreach efforts to other ethnic communities, and so we began to regularly attend those meetings and then coordinate with them. And then within our own community, we did a lot of outreach and education to get people to come out on May 1st.
You were also involved with the March 10th activity, but as we were talking about this show, you found out about a week ahead of time. Latinos United was involved with the March 10th a little bit earlier than that. What was it that had organizers of various immigrant rights groups decide that a march was the way to bring attention to some of these issues?
Well, I mean, I can't vouch for what exactly went on as well, because I was involved. I wasn't really involved in the planning process of it, but I was involved in the trying to get people out, passing out flyers and getting the word out. So I think it was just a matter of, you know, the fact that there was a lot of people, the one that couldn't vote, but also that we just needed to get people out and just show that we have strength in numbers. And so I think that, you know, I can't vouch for the exact reason why people went out to march as opposed to other you know, reasons, but maybe you would know. But I think that it was just a matter of just showing the amount of, you know, people that are out here and that actually in fact do support immigrant rights legislation.
I want to talk a little bit just from our own personal motivations as someone who also was in the parade on May Day. Having been involved in other social justice movements over my year, we've always wanted something like 500,000 people to show up on the streets of Chicago, and we've never really come close. I remember a march with Dr. King in the 60s where it was 80 or 100,000 people from Soldier Field to City Hall. Mm-hmm. And there was an echo of this, because that was also not a protesting crowd so much, although there were demands we were putting on the door of City Hall. Why do you think people turned out the way they did, given that some folks feel that protest marches are a thing of the past and don't accomplish anything?
I mean, I think the passing of the Sensenbrenner bill by the House really motivated the immigrant community and supporters to come out in full force, because it's such drastically terrible legislation that people really felt the importance of speaking out and showing in force that, you know, this is not acceptable. Like, we cannot let this this actually become a law of this country, and that you know, the best way to do that is to show the country that people are opposed to it, that people want something better for themselves and for their families, and I think that's one of the main reasons people came out like that.
Yeah, and I would second that as well. I think that, I mean, that it was just appalling to actually, you know, in Sensenbrenner that seek to criminalize a whole group of people that were immigrants, some largely Latino, others largely other groups that would be criminalizing them and people that helped them out. And I think it was just appalling, and people thought it was, you know, that this was something that it was so extreme that we needed to do something. We couldn't just stand still and let an entire group of people be criminalized as a result.
The March 10th march was a surprise the May Day march was heavily covered by the media, and we have some pictures we want to show just in case people forget the kind of group that was turning out that day that we'll start taking a look at here in a moment. But why Chicago? My sense is Chicago really became the center nationally for this kind of a response, not only to this legislation, but to take a look at how a different kind of attention ought to be paid to newly arrived immigrants.
I would say, I mean, first, Chicago has been, in the past couple of months prior to even March 10th, there had been a couple of immigrant-related marches that have taken place. I think that this time around there were a lot, I mean, the first time, the March 10th one, there was a lot of media coverage to it, and it just picked up. I mean, there were a couple of marches prior that weren't as big, but I think once the, momentum built, and then the whole Sensenbrenner thing, and I think that, Chicago, the city of Chicago has been typically, very good to immigrants. And so, I think that this was why, I mean, we needed to set, Chicago's a huge city, and we needed to set the precedent. And once they saw that we can pull it off everywhere else, I mean, it was just a domino effect. So.
But Chicago turned out a lot of people in March, and by our calculation, though there were a lot of other marches on May Day, I think we beat LA, and that's saying something. Did you hear from Korean counterparts in other cities? Were they as involved in this activity?
Yes, actually, our organization is part of a national organization called the National Korean American Service and Education Consortium. So we have affiliate centers in LA and in New York, and in both those cities, our centers also were organizing in Korean community to turn people out for the march.
Looking at the May Day event itself, I guess you wouldn't have been surprised that elected officials like Representative Lou Gutierrez or Barack Obama were present, but I was surprised when someone the likes of Rahm Emanuel showed up.
Interestingly enough, and this is just a personal story of mine, is that prior to the March 10th march, I was in D.C. for an Advocacy Day training. And we were on the Hill lobbying our congressman, and we actually had, at least I was a representative from Illinois that went to speak to our legislators, our congressmen, on their votes, and we specifically went online, checked who voted in favor and against Sensenbrenner, and went to visit our legislators that voted against, and the ones that were rumored to have lobbied internally to have some of the Democratic members vote in favor of Sensenbrenner. And so when I was in D.C., it was interesting because I did visit Lipinski, I did visit Rahm Emanuel's office, we did visit Melissa Bean's office, and we spoke to their staff, and we pretty much were saying, look, there's a march going on Friday, and if you are perceived, and I don't know if you're aware, Mr. Congressman, but if you are perceived to be anti-immigrant, which you are at this point, we're going to let it be known at this march. And of course, the staffers I felt that were rolling their eyes as I walked out the door, and that was prior to knowing the magnitude of the march. And so once I had left DC and then was marching on March 10th, it was amazing. I mean, to see all those people, and I think that the people that rolled their eyes at me in some of these offices were pretty much remembering who I was, because we were there 2 days before the march. So yeah, it was definitely surprising to see some of them. What the rationale was for having them up there, I don't know. Maybe you're privy to that information, but I think that seeing the power of the marches, both marches, has might have changed some opinions in Congress, and I'm hoping that maybe that was the sign, was that their opinions are being changed as we speak and as they're seeing all these people march. So.